girl didn't struggle. Even with Alpha Vokon's massive hand crushing her throat, lifting her inches off the cold stone floor, she didn't claw at him. She didn't gasp. She didn't fight. She just stared. That was wrong. Everything about her was wrong. Vokon's grip tightened. His primal instincts snarled, demanding he break, dominate, and possess. But a flicker of cold unease cut through his blistering rage. "Say my name," he commanded. Nothing. No fear in her hollow eyes, no breath parting her lips. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he shifted his grip. He pressed his thumb against the hollow of her neck, searching for the frantic flutter of prey. He waited, and found none. No pulse, no heartbeat, not a single sign of life. Vokon froze. The invincible Alpha King trembled. "What?" he whispered, his voice laced with pure dread. "Are you?" Chapter 1. Mirinaigo. This was the most lucrative black market in the werewolf underworld. Now it was a tomb. Vokon's boots crunched over shattered iron. He didn't look at the smugglers bleeding against the walls. His glowing golden eyes locked entirely on the heavy steel vault at the back of the room. "Open it," Vokon commanded. The auctioneer dropped to his knees, trembling violently. "Alpha King, please, the vault. It's just defective goods, a broken toy. Open the vault." "Do it, Rook," Vokon's beta warned from the shadows. "Before he decides you don't need your head." Metal groaned. The heavy doors hissed open, spilling freezing white mist into the dim room. Vokon stood tall, his jaw tight. Then she stepped out. The silence in the room became absolute. She walked barefoot over broken glass without a single flinch. But it wasn't the blood on her feet that made Vokon stop breathing. It was her face, the porcelain skin, the dark, hollow eyes. The exact face of the woman who had betrayed his pack 2 centuries ago. The traitor he had personally executed. "Is this a joke?" Vokon whispered. "No, no joke," the auctioneer cried out. "We found her wandering the dead wastes. She doesn't speak. She's broken." Vokon didn't hear him, because the moment she crossed the threshold, the scent hit him. Mate. The realization slammed into his chest. The sacred bond flared to life, burning under his skin like a venomous disease. The universe was mocking him. His fated mate wore the face of his worst nightmare. Vokon closed the distance in a blur. His massive hand shot out, grabbing her by the throat. He lifted her effortlessly. He expected her to cower, to beg. Instead, her skin was freezing. No pulse beneath his fingers, no heartbeat. He dropped her. She hit the stone floor hard. She didn't cry out. She simply stood back up. She adjusted her posture, too precisely, like a machine correcting itself. Vokon's pride warred with the primal pull of the bond. His wolf screamed at him to claim her, to brand her. He hated the need clawing at his chest. He would not let a bond control him. He grabbed her waist, yanking her flush against his hard chest. She didn't push him away. She just rested her hands flat against him. Her touch pierced his skin like ice. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, his fangs extended. "I decide what you are now," he snarled. He sank his teeth deep into her flesh. The bond should have burned warm, a rush of golden heat, tying 2 souls together. It didn't. It froze. A horrific surge of dark energy blasted backward through the bond. It ripped through Vokon's mind, tearing at his senses with the force of a hurricane. It felt like swallowing freezing acid. Vokon violently shoved her away. "Ah!" The invincible Alpha King stumbled backward. He hit the ground on one knee. "Alpha!" Rook yelled, drawing his blade. Vokon choked. He coughed violently. Thick black blood spilled from his lips, splattering against the gray stone floor. His chest heaved. The remaining smugglers scrambled backward in sheer panic. The Alpha King was bleeding. Vaucan forced himself to look up, wiping the black bile from his jaw. Lark hadn't moved. The puncture wounds on her neck were visible, but no red blood flowed from the bite. She just stared down at him, perfectly still, perfectly empty. Vaucan's golden eyes flared with absolute rage. "What exactly," Vaucan rasped, his voice rough and laced with venom, "is running through your veins?" He slowly rose to his feet, wiping the last drop of black blood from his chin. "Because whatever it is, it chose me, and I don't believe in mercy." Chapter 2. The dungeons of the Blood Knight Pack were built to break minds. Most prisoners didn't last a night. She hadn't even noticed where she was. Vaucan stood outside cell 4, his jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. He hadn't slept. The taste of black, freezing blood still lingered on his tongue. "Report," he barked. Rook leaned against the stone wall, looking unusually pale. Next to him, Mora, the pack's oldest and most ruthless healer, wiped her hands on a towel. She didn't look at the Alpha King. "She hasn't touched the food," Mora said, her voice gravelly. "Hasn't touched the water. Hasn't slept." "Then make her need it," Vaucan snapped. "I can't." Mora looked up, her eyes wide with a fear Vaucan had never seen in her. "Alpha, she doesn't need it. I tried to draw a sample of whatever infected you. My silver needle bent against her skin. When I finally managed to make a shallow cut," Mora swallowed hard. "It wasn't blood. It was thick, like freezing sap, and the wound, it sealed itself before a single drop could hit the floor." Rook pushed off the wall. "Say the word," Rook said quietly. "I'll erase whatever she is." Vaucan's head snapped toward his beta. His golden eyes flared. A low guttural growl ripped from his chest. Rook choked. The beta dropped to one knee under the sudden crushing weight of the Alpha's aura, gasping for air. "No one touches her." Vaucan's voice was a lethal whisper. "She is mine to break." He turned and keyed the iron door open. It shrieked on its hinges. Lark sat in the center of the cell. The stone floor was freezing. She was still wearing the thin, torn white dress. Any normal wolf would be shivering. Any rogue would be curled into a ball. Lark sat perfectly straight. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her eyes stared straight ahead at the blank wall. She didn't flinch at the loud noise of the door. She didn't look at him. The mate bond violently twisted in Vaucan's chest. His wolf whined, a pathetic, desperate sound, demanding he strip off his heavy coat and wrap it around her frail shoulders, demanding he warm her. Disgust curled in his gut. Not at her, at himself. He marched forward and kicked the metal tray of untouched food across the room. It clattered violently against the iron bars. Lark didn't blink. "Are you playing a game?" Vaucan loomed over her, letting his massive shadow swallow her entirely. "Do you think starving yourself will make me feel pity?" Silence. "Answer me." He grabbed her shoulders, yanking her to her feet. Her head lolled slightly, adjusting to the sudden movement, before her hollow eyes locked onto his. "I survived centuries without a mate," Vaucan sneered, his face inches from hers. "I eradicated my own weakness. I slaughtered the woman who wore that face. You think I will bow to a bond just because the moon goddess decided to play a sick joke?" No reaction, not a spark of anger, not a tear of fear. Her utter emptiness was driving him insane. "Fight back," he growled. He slammed her against the stone wall. The impact echoed through the dungeon. It should have broken her ribs. She just absorbed the blow. Her expression remained terribly, flawlessly blank. Vaucan lost it. The frustration, the lingering taste of poison, the agonizing pull of the bond. It all shattered his iron control. If he couldn't make her fear him, he would make her feel him. He pinned her wrists above her head with one hand, his other hand dragged down her throat, his thumb pressing hard into her collarbone. He leaned in, his hot breath ghosting over her lips. His thumb pressed harder, as if he could force a heartbeat into existence. He pressed his chest flush against hers, seeking the familiar, frantic racing of a terrified prey. He wanted to hear her heart hammer against her ribs. He needed proof that there was something alive inside this nightmare. He waited for the beat. 1 second, 2, nothing. Vokan froze. The dark fog of lust evaporated instantly. He released her wrists. His hand moved down, pressing flat against the center of her chest. Over her heart, skin, bone, coldness, total, absolute silence. His own heart hammered in his ears, deafeningly loud, but beneath his palm, the space inside her chest was entirely hollow. Vokan stepped back as if he had been burned. The oxygen vanished from his lungs. He stared at the unblinking porcelain doll standing in the dark. "Your heart," Vokan breathed out, the words catching in his throat. "Why isn't it beating?" Chapter 3. Why isn't it beating? The question hung in the freezing air of the dungeon. Vokan stared at the hollow space beneath his palm. He waited for a reaction, a flicker of fear, a shift in her dead eyes. Instead, her head tilted. It snapped to the side at a sharp, unnatural angle. A sickening crack echoed off the stone walls. Vokan's instincts flared. He took a half step back. Threat detected. She didn't speak the words, but the shift in the room's atmosphere was absolute. Her pupils dilated instantly, swallowing the whites of her eyes until they were pools of pitch black. She moved, not like a wolf, not like a rogue, like a bullet. She launched herself at him, her hand flat and rigid like a steel blade aimed directly at his throat. Vokan deflected it at the last millisecond. Her forearm clashed against his. The impact was terrifying. It didn't feel like hitting flesh and bone. It felt like striking solid iron. The shockwave numbed Vokan's arm. "Stand down," Vokan barked. His alpha command vibrated with enough force to shatter glass. She didn't blink. She didn't obey. She used his own momentum against him, twisting midair and driving a devastating knee into his ribs. Vokan grunted, sliding backward. He was the Alpha King. He had slaughtered armies. But this wasn't a fight. It was an execution protocol. She lunged again. Vokan caught her wrist, his grip like a vice. He pinned her arm, preparing to throw her to the ground to immobilize her. Snap! Vokan's eyes widened. She didn't try to pull away. She deliberately rotated her body, dislocating her own shoulder joint with a wet crunch to slip out of his grip. No scream, no gasp of pain, no hesitation. Her arm hung at a grotesque angle for exactly 1 second before she forcefully slammed it against the wall, popping the joint back into place. She just kept coming. She spun, her fingernails slicing through the dark air. Vokan dodged, but he was a fraction of a second too late. 4 razor-sharp lines tore across his chest, slicing through his shirt and biting deep into his flesh. Hot red blood spilled. The metallic scent of the Alpha's blood hit the freezing air. And suddenly, the machine broke. Lark froze. Her hand stopped inches from his face. Her perfectly balanced stance collapsed. A violent, terrifying tremor racked her frail body. She looked down at her fingers, coated in his blood. System error. A ragged, choked sound tore from her throat. It was the first sound she had made since the auction house. A desperate, broken gasp for air. She stumbled backward, hitting the iron bars of the cage. Her hands flew to her chest, her fingers digging painfully into her collarbones. She slid down the bars, falling to her knees on the cold stone. Her face contorted in sudden alien agony. She couldn't breathe. She was suffocating because she had hurt her mate. The mate bond, the primal magic of the moon goddess, was revolting against the artificial commands wired into her brain. Every drop of blood Vokon bled felt like a knife twisting inside her empty chest. Vokon stood still. He ignored the bleeding wounds on his chest. He watched her curl into herself, shaking uncontrollably. The dead porcelain doll was shattering. He saw the flash of pure, terrified humanity desperately trying to break through the programming. "You feel that," Vokon stepped forward. The rage in his chest was suddenly replaced by a strange, overwhelming protectiveness. His voice dropped to a rough whisper. "You aren't just a machine. You feel me." He reached out, his hand hovering over her trembling shoulder. He wanted to pull her up. He wanted to claim whatever broken soul was trapped inside that body. But the moment of humanity was violently cut short. Lark's spine snapped completely straight. A sickly emerald light flared from beneath her skin. It illuminated her rib cage, pulsing brightly from the hollow, empty cavity where her heart was supposed to be. Vokon stepped back, his golden eyes narrowing. "What is this?" Lark slowly stood up. The agony on her face vanished. The trembling stopped. When she lifted her head, she smiled. It wasn't her smile. It was a cold, arrogant, utterly sinister smirk that stretched her lips too wide. And when she finally spoke, the voice echoing from her throat wasn't female. It was male, smooth, ancient, and dripping with venom. "Oh, the great Alpha King," the voice mocked, vibrating through Lark's vocal cords, reduced to a sentimental dog bleeding on a dungeon floor. Vokon's blood ran ice cold. He knew that voice. It belonged to a ghost. It belonged to the dark sorcerer he had supposedly killed centuries ago. "Morven," Vokon growled, his fangs fully extending. "You wolves and your pathetic belief in destiny." Morvan's voice laughed through Lark's mouth. "Love is a disease, Vokon. It makes you weak. It makes you hesitate. I have cleansed this vessel of such filth. I have created perfection, a living weapon unburdened by a heart." The emerald light in her chest pulsed brighter, turning blindingly toxic. Lark raised her hands, her fingernails elongated, turning pitch black and sharp as scythes. "Flawless execution, my puppet," Morvan whispered, the dark magic completely overtaking the room. "Now, end him." Chapter 4. End him. She didn't run. She blurred. Vokon braced himself. He didn't shift into his wolf form. Shifting meant losing his absolute control. Shifting meant tearing his mate to shreds. He refused. She struck, a flurry of lethal mechanical blows. Vokon blocked, parried, and absorbed the hits. Every impact rattled his bones. She felt no pain, no fatigue. She was a perpetual motion machine of violence. "Is this the great Alpha King?" Morvan sneered, his ancient venomous voice echoing through her lips. "Refusing to strike down the enemy because of a biological glitch? Because the moon told you she is yours? You hide in a broken girl's skin, Morvan," Vokon snarled, deflecting a blow that would have taken his head off. "You are a coward." "I am a visionary." The emerald light in her chest flared violently. "You wolves call yourselves apex predators, yet you are slaves to a scent, slaves to a heartbeat. Love is a disease, Vokon. It makes you weak. It makes you hesitate." She spun, sweeping his legs. Vokon dropped, catching himself with one hand, and drove his shoulder into her stomach. He slammed her against the iron bars of the cage. The metal groaned and bent under the force. He pinned her wrists, his massive weight holding her down. I cleanse this vessel of that filth, Morvan mocked, the toxic green light burning against Vokon's chest. I scooped out the pathetic weakness you call humanity. I built a chimera out of dead flesh and silence. She feels nothing. She is perfect. Vokon looked down at her face. His breathing was heavy. His muscles strained against her unnatural strength. Perfect. Vokon stared into the pitch-black voids of her eyes. Morvan was wrong. Beneath the sinister green glow, her eyes were trembling. Her body was perfectly still, locked in the sorcerer's command, but her jaw clenched so hard he heard her teeth cracking. A violent, agonizing shudder ripped through her frail frame. Then, a drop of liquid fell from her left eye. It wasn't clear. It was thick and crimson, a tear of blood. She was crying. The soul Morvan claimed to have destroyed wasn't gone. It was screaming inside the cage of her bones. The mate bond had sparked it to life, and now it was burning her alive from the inside out. The collision of Morvan's dark programming and her newly awakened humanity was tearing her mind in half. Another drop of blood spilled down her porcelain cheek. Then another. Vokon. The voice wasn't Morvan's. It wasn't smooth or ancient. It was small, broken, like crushed glass dragging over stone. It was hers. Vokon's breath hitched. His heart stopped. For a fraction of a second, the Alpha King let his guard down. He loosened his grip on her wrists. A fatal mistake. The emerald light surged, violently hijacking her limbs. Morvan roared in fury at the sudden loss of control. Her arm shot forward. Vokon didn't block. He couldn't. Her pitch-black, razor-sharp nails pierced the thick muscle of his chest. They slipped between his ribs with a sickening sound, deep, right over his beating heart. Vokon gasped. The invincible Alpha King dropped to his knees. He looked down. Her hand was buried in his chest. His hot, red blood rapidly stained the white fabric of her dress. Morvan's dark laughter echoed in the freezing dungeon. Checkmate. The disease of love kills you just as I predicted. But Lark didn't push deeper. Her hand froze inside him. Blood poured heavily from both her eyes now, painting her face in a horrifying, tragic mask. Her body convulsed in absolute agony as she fought the sorcerer's command with everything she had. She was ripping her own newly formed soul apart just to stop her fingers from closing around his heart. Her hollow, bleeding eyes met Vokon's golden ones. "Kill me," Lark choked out. Her real voice was raw, desperate, and pleading. Vokon coughed, hot blood spilling over his lips. "No, please." Her fingers twitched agonizingly against the muscle of his heart. She sobbed, a horrifying wet sound. "Kill me, or I will crush it." Chapter 5. "Kill me, or I will crush it." The words tore from Lark's throat, jagged and wet. Blood poured from her dark eyes, completely staining her porcelain face. Her arm was buried deep in Vokon's chest. Her pitch-black nails rested directly against the heavy, frantic beating of his heart. One twitch, 1 millisecond of lost control, and the Alpha King would be dead. Vokon didn't gasp. He didn't beg. He stayed on his knees, his golden eyes locked onto hers. "Do it," Morvan's voice sneered, echoing from the toxic green light pulsing in the hollow cavity of Lark's chest. "Kill her, Vokon. You have your free hand. Your claws are out. One swipe to her neck, and you survive. Strike down the glitch." Vokon raised his right hand. His claws slid out, razor-sharp and gleaming in the dim dungeon light. He could do it. His wolf screamed for survival. He was faster than her programming. He could sever her head before her fingers closed. He looked at the trembling girl in front of him. She was violently ripping her newly awakened soul to shreds. just to buy him 3 seconds of life. She was enduring unimaginable agony to fight a god-tier sorcerer for a man who had done nothing but humiliate her. "Strike," Morvan roared, the green light flaring. "Prove to me that you are the perfect predator. Prove that your heart is just a useless organ." Vokon stared at the razor edge of his own claws. If he killed her now, he survived. But he survived as exactly what Morvan wanted, a cold, calculating machine that prioritized logic over love, a monster that sacrificed its mate for oxygen. Vokon lowered his hand. The Alpha King retracted his claws. Morvan's laughter died instantly. The emerald light flickered in pure confusion. Vokon reached out with a bare, blood-stained hand and gently cupped Lark's cheek. He wiped a streak of crimson tear from her skin. His thumb was warm. Her skin was freezing. "You think a heart makes me weak, Morvan?" Vokon's voice was a low, steady rumble. It didn't shake, not even with a hand buried in his chest. "You think it makes me a slave? It is killing you," the sorcerer's voice hissed through her teeth. "No." Vokon smiled, a dark, bloody, terrifying smile. "It gives me the one thing you will never have." The dungeon fell dead silent. "The freedom to choose how I die," Vokon whispered. He didn't look at the green light. He didn't look at the ghost of the sorcerer. He looked only at Lark. He looked into the bleeding, terrified human eyes, trapped behind the hollow darkness. "Vokon, no," Lark choked out, her real voice breaking completely. "Please." "Stop fighting it," Vokon commanded gently. "Not an alpha order, a plea. I am not a victim. I am giving it to you. I don't want it." She sobbed, her entire body shaking violently. "I'm a monster." "You are my mate," Vokon said, his voice absolute, "and you are empty, so let me fill you." Before Morvan could process the words, before Lark could try to pull her hand away, Vokon moved. He didn't try to pull her arm out of his chest. He grabbed her wrist with his massive hand and violently pulled her deeper. Squelch! Lark screamed, a deafening, earth-shattering scream of pure, unadulterated humanity. Her fingers were forced to close. Vokon's heart ruptured. A massive surge of boiling golden alpha blood exploded from his chest. But it didn't hit the floor. It traveled straight up Lark's arm. The ancient magic of the mate bond ignited. It wasn't a rejection this time. It was a complete, sacrificial transfer. The Alpha King was pouring every ounce of his life force, his power, and his very soul directly into the empty vessel of the Chimera. The toxic emerald light in her chest shrieked. It violently clashed with the blinding, burning gold of Vokon's blood. "No!" Morvan's voice shrieked, the sound tearing at the fabric of reality. "This is impossible. You cannot rewrite the code." "Watch me," Vokon breathed out, blood spilling heavily from his lips. The golden light overtook the green. It filled the hollow cavity in her chest. It wove through her freezing veins, melting the ice, burning away the dark sorcery. Thump! A sound echoed in the dungeon. Lark stopped screaming. Her eyes blew wide open. Thump! Thump! It was a heartbeat. Loud, frantic, deafeningly alive. Vokon's grip on her wrist loosened. His golden eyes slowly lost their brilliant glow, fading into a dull, peaceful amber. The heavy, oppressive aura of the Blood Knight Pack's ruler vanished from the room. He fell forward, his massive body collapsing entirely against her frail frame. Lark caught him. She dropped to her knees under his dead weight, holding his lifeless body tightly to her chest. Her chest, the chest that was no longer hollow, the chest that was now vibrating with the impossibly strong heartbeat of a dead king. She stared into the dark abyss of the dungeon, the blackness in her eyes shattered completely. replaced by a brilliant, blinding gold. Warmth rushed through her veins. For the first time in her existence, she felt the coldness of the stone. She smelled the iron of the blood. She felt the agonizing, suffocating weight of grief. Sensory overload. Above ground, the world erupted. A massive, terrifying war horn blared through the night sky, vibrating through the bedrock of the dungeon. It was the signal. Morven's dark army had breached the gates of the Blood Knight Pack. The invasion had begun. But down in the dark, the living weapon simply held the dead king and took her first real breath. Chapter 6. Thump, thump. The sound was deafening. It echoed in her ears, vibrating through her jaw, rattling the cage of her ribs. Lark gasped. Air flooded her lungs for the first time. It burned. The scent of the dungeon, damp stone, iron, and the sickeningly sweet smell of alpha blood crashed into her brain, overwhelming her senses. The freezing floor suddenly felt like ice against her bare skin. She was feeling everything, all at once. She looked down at the massive, lifeless body in her arms. Vokon's chest was still. His golden eyes were closed. Alpha! Footsteps thundered down the stone corridor. Rook and Mora burst into the dungeon, weapons drawn, their faces pale with terror. They froze. The beta's sword clattered to the ground. No. Before Rook could step forward, the dungeon walls violently shook. A heavy, suffocating wave of dark magic flooded the room. The shadows morphed, twisting together until a figure stepped out from the darkness. Morven. The sorcerer wasn't a ghost anymore. He had crossed the breached gates and descended into the dark to claim his prize. He wore robes of midnight silk, his face twisted in a mask of supreme arrogance. Behind him, a dozen elite shadow guards filed into the room, blocking the exit. A tragic, pathetic end to a king, Morvan sneered, looking down at Vokon's body. He died for nothing, a dog throwing his life away for a broken toy. Rook roared, shifting halfway, ready to tear the sorcerer apart. "Stand down, dog," Morvan waved a dismissive hand. A shock wave of dark magic slammed Rook and Mora against the wall, pinning them instantly. Morvan turned his cold eyes to Lark. "You failed your primary directive, puppet," he said, "but the Alpha's blood within you is a decent consolation prize. Come here. I will wipe your memory again and put you to proper use." Lark didn't move. She kept her head down, her bloody fingers gently brushing through Vokon's dark hair. "I gave you a command," Morvan barked, raising his hand. The toxic green magic sparked from his fingertips, ready to hijack her nervous system. He cast the spell. It hit her chest and shattered. Like glass hitting titanium, the green magic disintegrated into harmless dust. Morvan took a step back, his arrogant sneer faltering. "What?" Lark slowly laid Vokon's head against the stone floor. She stood up. She didn't adjust her posture like a machine. She rose with the lethal, terrifying grace of an apex predator. When she lifted her head, the hollow black voids in her eyes were gone. They were burning, blinding, incandescent gold, the exact color of the Alpha King. "You called him a dog," Lark whispered. Her voice wasn't broken anymore. It didn't sound like crushed glass. It resonated with the terrifying, overlapping duality of a chimera and an alpha. "You called me empty." She took a step forward. The air pressure in the dungeon dropped instantly. The stone beneath her bare feet cracked. Morvan's eyes widened in sheer panic. "Kill her!" he screamed to his guards. "Tear her apart!" The 12 shadow guards lunged. Lark didn't block. She didn't parry. She became a blur of golden light and absolute carnage. She moved with her programmed, mechanical precision, But this time, it was fueled by something Morvan could never understand: unadulterated human rage, grief, love. The first guard didn't even see her move. The impact of her palm against his chest shattered his ribs, sending his body flying across the room to violently crack against the iron bars. He didn't get up. 3 more attacked at once. Lark spun, the golden aura around her flaring like a localized sun. She grabbed one by the throat and threw him into the others with the force of a freight train. No blood sprayed, no flesh was ripped, but the raw, concussive force of her strikes was devastating. She was dismantling them entirely through speed and overwhelming alpha power. In less than 10 seconds, 12 elite warriors lay motionless on the floor. Morvan stumbled backward, tripping over his own robes. The great sorcerer was trembling. Lark stood before him. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a goddess of war wearing a blood-stained white dress. "This is impossible," Morvan screamed, crawling backward. "You have no soul. You are my creation." "I was your creation," Lark said softly. She reached down, grabbing Morvan by the throat, and lifted him off the ground with one hand. "But I am his mate." Her golden eyes flared. A massive surge of burning alpha energy channeled through her arm and blasted directly into Morvan's chest. The sorcerer didn't even have time to scream. The golden fire instantly incinerated his dark magic from the inside out. His eyes rolled back. His body went entirely limp. Lark dropped him. He hit the floor, nothing more than an empty, powerless shell. The war horn outside abruptly silenced. The hive mind of the Shadow Army had been severed. The battle was over. But the silence in the dungeon was terrifying. Lark turned around. The golden glow in her eyes began to flicker. She looked at her hands. They were covered in blood. Morvan's guards were scattered around her. The sheer destruction she had just caused hit her all at once. The adrenaline crashed. Thump, thump. The heart in her chest beat frantically, pumping fear, guilt, and a suffocating sensory overload into her brain. The cold air burned her skin. The silence was too loud. She stumbled backward, terrified of her own strength. She was still a weapon. She was still a monster. She retreated until her back hit the cold, damp wall of the cell. She slid down to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, trembling violently. Across the room, Rook and Mora finally broke free from the fading spell. But before they could rush to their fallen king, a sound stopped them. A sharp, ragged gasp for air. Vokan's chest heaved. The bond was a two-way street. He had poured his life into her empty vessel, completing her, and in return, her newly awakened soul, fueled by his own infinite alpha spark, had tethered his spirit, dragging him back from the void. The Alpha King opened his eyes. They weren't golden. They were a soft, human amber. He coughed, pushing himself up onto his elbows. His chest, where the fatal wound had been, was already knitting itself back together, leaving only a jagged scar. "Alpha!" Rook fell to his knees. Vokan held up a hand, silencing his beta. He didn't look at Rook. He didn't look at the dead sorcerer, or the defeated guards. His eyes found the corner of the room. Lark was curled into a tight ball. She was crying hysterically, her hands covering her face. She was drowning in the terrifying, beautiful, agonizing ocean of human emotion. Vokan stood up. He was weak, his clothes torn and soaked in blood, but he didn't care. He walked slowly across the shattered stone. He stepped over the bodies of his enemies without a single glance. He stopped in front of her. He didn't command her to look at him. He didn't exert his alpha aura to calm her down. Instead, the ruthless, undefeated king of the Blood Knight Pact did something he had never done in his entire centuries-long existence. He dropped to one knee. He knelt amidst the ruins right in front of the trembling, broken girl. Gently, he reached out and pulled her blood-stained hands away from her face. Her terrified, tear-filled eyes locked onto his. She flinched, waiting for the judgment, waiting for him to look at her like a weapon. Vokon took her trembling hands and pressed them flat against his own scarred chest, right over his newly beating heart. He held them there, anchoring her chaotic mind to his steady rhythm. "Don't be afraid," Vokon whispered, his voice incredibly deep, rough, and entirely devoted. Lark let out a shattered sob. I don't know how to be human." Vokon leaned in, pressing his forehead against hers. "We will learn together," he said softly, "because only by kneeling before you do I cease to be a monster." In the freezing pitch-black dungeon surrounded by death and ash, Lark closed her eyes and let out her first, true cry. It wasn't a sound of agony. It was the sound of life.